Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the 2021 Stir Shaken Virtual Summit. My name is Mark Robbins. I'm President and Managing Director of the SIP Forum. I'd like to welcome everyone to session 5 of day 3 of the event. Today, the webinar this hour is going to be on the ultimate call experience journey. And I'd like to welcome Tracey Cash, who's Director of Solutions Design at First Orion. Welcome, Tracey.
Hello, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.
Okay, so I'm going to kick us off, and thank you all for joining First Orion today as we talk about the ultimate call experience journey. Let me first introduce my colleagues that are going to be talking to you today. So we have Brian Smith, who's the Vice President of Product Management. We have Nysia George, who's the Associate Director of Data Science. And Julie Fowler, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Solution Architecture. So today we're going to take you on a journey, but before we get into the journey per se, let me tell you something that I ran across today via an article that dated back to April of 1963. It's very interesting. So this article was titled around the ability to carry a phone in your pocket in the future. All right, so not only was this being studied, it was also predicted that a visual image could be displayed. Think about that. It's actually quite remarkable to think about the evolution, what's happened in the telecom space, but there's also been an evolution around fraudulent activity. I remember in the late 1990s, as I started my career in the telecom space, that we became laser focused on preventing cloning of a device. Remember? I'm sure all of you do. Many of you were worried about cloning of the ESN and cloning of the devices. Well, we're going to take you on a journey further that talks about the scammers and their tactics alongside the industry responses and the solutions devised to curtail and eliminate scammers and their scamming activity. We as an industry have a common goal. It's focused on identifying unwanted and illegal calling activity, while also empowering the end users with knowledge about who is calling and why. So this journey is complex, with several inputs and factors that have to be considered that influence whether we decide to accept or decline a call. So let me tell you a little bit about First Orion. So we were founded in 2008. And our DNA is built on big data. It's who we are. And this foundation enabled us to bring cutting-edge solutions for call protection, branded calling, and stir shaken to the market. So let's talk also about the problem. And so while the problem is of no surprise to this audience, I want you to think about things in relative terms. And have you thought about the relativity of the problem and how successful the scammers have become? They have built a big business, and not only is it big, it's very successful. There's nearly 1 in 3 Americans that say they've fallen victim to a phone scam in the past year. That's roughly 59 million Americans that have lost over 29.8 billion with a B dollars in phone scams alone from June 2020 to 2021. So think about it. If you took that money that the scammers made in the last year and you ranked it among the Fortune 500, these scammers would be sitting at 101. They're not even at the bottom of the Fortune 500. They're near the top. So what does that tell me? What does that tell us? It tells us that not only are they successful, not only are they being profitable, but they are more than motivated to continue what they are doing, but so are we. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nysia George, who will educate us further on the scammer's journey and the power of analytics.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracey. So over the course of the next few slides, we'll spend some time reviewing the evolution of the scam industry. To do so, Brian and I will take sort of a seesaw approach where I highlight the evolution of scam tactics, and in return, Brian will review industry response. So as we talk about scam and the industry response, it's really important to call out just the importance and the critical role of analytics and also the progression of analytics to be able to mitigate the effect of scam calls. So we start the period from, up until 2015. And I'd say during that time, scamming or scam activity was largely characterized by bad actors sitting on a number and masquerading as an enterprise. So what do we mean by that? Can you imagine a telephone sweepstakes scam targeting the elderly and pretending to be Make-A-Wish Foundation? Or even callers pretending to be from the government offering fake grants or rebates in exchange for an upfront payment. So during this time, during this period, it was reported that scammers were pretending to be the IRS, and even that scam alone was swindling Americans out of millions of dollars.
So thank you, Nysia. So I'm going to elaborate a little bit on the industry response here. So all of you all know that several years leading up to 2015, combating scam was a thing, right? The National Do Not Call Registry had been in place for over a decade, and frustrations and concerns of these unwanted calls were getting louder and louder. And so over-the-top application providers took the very first step in to provide a solution to do basic things like blocking on device, give users the ability to file complaints, look up numbers, things of that nature. In these early days, analytics played a vital role of creating a foundation as it relates to catch and scam. But all of those OTT solutions push, like naughty list down as far as a number-based solution down to the device. But that scratched really just the surface of what could be done to protect users from scams. So we're really limited by device technology, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that in depth. So as you all probably very well know, Android and iOS, just to name a couple, there's only so many numbers you can load on a device. And so while it really worked for the day, we knew that it had limitations, right? And we knew that this thing was getting bigger and bigger, and we had to do something about it. All of us participated in figuring out solutions to try to figure out how we would help the market, right? And so, when you think about a prepaid user or someone who has a lower end device, it's problematic to load, 100,000 or 1 million numbers on a device. And literally today we have millions and millions of numbers in rotation, right? And so while it was a good baseline at that time to try to catch scam, it was slow, right? Updating deltas as it relates to scam that we're seeing. And by that time, users, a lot of them were taken advantage of, unfortunately, right? And so at this particular point in time, it made a dent, but we knew that we needed to go further.
So as app solutions were better able to identify bad traffic and then could use that data from either the app feedback or data collected through complaints through the FCC, right? The industry better understood some of the notorious numbers that belonged on these block lists. Like I said, via the analytics or in combination with this consumer feedback. Well, as the block list solution got a bit better at detecting the bad activity, the scammers had to evolve. Fortunately for them, advancements in software pretty much opened the floodgates for spoofing activity. So during this time, and we're now honing on the period between 2015 and 2018, spoofing took off, right? It wasn't too far-fetched for a consumer to receive a call from their own phone number. And I can attest to this personally. I'm in the car with my mom and my phone rings, and you could see, on the cars, the call as your phone rings, if it's a Bluetooth connection to your car, you can see the number on the dashboard. And there it was, my own number was calling me. So my mom, gives me a quick look over, and I'm, okay, well, it's not me. My phone's in the back in my purse. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to answer the phone, so I have no idea what kind of scam verbiage was on the other end, but I know firsthand it happens. But largely during this time period, scammers relied heavily on neighbor spoofing. And neighbor spoofing is really where a scammer presents a calling number that's very similar to the called number. And the intention there was to the intention there was that a consumer would think it's a number that maybe they should know, or know, is this important business? It's in my same area, and would be more inclined to pick up. And in the beginning, it was more about 6-digit spoofing, right? You could pretty much match the first 5 or 6 digits of the called number, and once they, didn't get as much, as the solutions advanced, and they weren't able to get as much traction from that neighbor spoofing technique, then they switched to just, I'll spoof the area code. So if I call you, or if I present a number that's the same area code as the number that I'm calling, again, maybe they'll be more inclined to pick up. But for analytic solutions, it's much more difficult to indicate that a 3-digit match is a neighbor spoof than it is to indicate that a 6-digit match is a neighbor spoof. In addition, right, so not only did the software allow for spoofing, the software allowed for scammers to rotate through various numbers within a short time period. So you were spoofing and rotating through numbers to get around existing scam ID solutions. And just in case you didn't pick up the phone, scammers began to leave voicemail messages urging consumers to call them back. The messages often contain a sense of urgency and would use rhetoric such as legal proceedings, time sensitive, urgent, and even suspend bank account.
Right, so this is the moving of the goalposts, right? As we make advancements, they take it a step further. And at this time, if you were asked a user, 26% of them, when surveyed, said that they expected their carrier to take care of these kinds of calls. And so while SIP signaling had been around for quite some time, bad actors really began to exploit spoofing technology, just like Nysia just mentioned. So it really allowed them to kind of run under the radar. And frankly, this was the fever pitch moment. And it really caused a lot of things to set in motion, like the government getting involved to drive an answer to illegal spoofing. It was a catalyst for a multitude of number registries that come about. And it really pushed the industry forward to move towards more in-network solutions for catching scam. And so with bad actors having more of an edge, just being an imposter here, having more data about why a user was calling mattered more than ever. And really, first around, we actually had the opportunity to influence the industry response around with the Institute of the Strike Force categories. And so that preemptively gave users the ability to take action on calls, right? So I want to send these calls to voicemail. I want to block these kind of calls, and I want these kinds of calls delivered to me. So in the example, if you kind of got your eyes to the left, you can see a charity call, right? I want to get charity calls delivered to me. I want to send telemarketers to voicemail, and fully I want to block all scam calls. And so at this time, analytics enabled by a carrier network really cleared a bunch of hurdles for us, and many in the industry. And so it allowed for the capacity to do 10 times over what we could do on device to be able to deliver a service that we knew were protecting more users. So it was obvious for us. An in-network solution using artificial intelligence, machine learning, was the only way to really make a big dent in what was happening in the industry.
So we pick back up with 2018 through 2020, and I think it's important to understand that even as we've segmented time into certain periods and we're highlighting scam or prevalent scams during those periods, that scammers didn't abandon their old tactics, right? So as you move into this third period, it's not like we don't see, or we didn't see 6-digit spoofing or 3-digit spoofing anymore. You have new actors on the scene. You also have this kind of, the popular saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So if you're still able to get a bit of leverage out of old scam tactics and you're still adding money to the bottom line, then why switch it? So you still have all of the old scams, but now you have certain scams like voice phishing. And here it's important to understand that voice phishing didn't come about the scene during 2018, right? They were doing that a while back. But during this time period, those types of scams got a bit more personal. Scammers were armed with much more personal information than they were before. And so when you're on the phone with someone and you're trying to get personal information, such as your social security number, or even financial details, such as a bank account number or a PIN, the argument is a bit more compelling. I'm able to tell you, hey, the last 4 digits of your social, not social, the last 4 digits of your, maybe social, but of your credit card number ended 1, 2, 3, 4, and I see you have fraudulent charges on your account. Can you verify your account number? I'm going to mail you a new card. Can you give me your PIN so that I can have or make sure that the new card matches your old PIN? And so they're able to be a bit more compelling on the opposite end, where the user is, even if you kind of suspect something, you're kind of going back and forth in your head. And, obviously they were able to get some sort of leeway out of it because people were falling for it. So you see a lot of voice phishing scams rise up during that time. In addition, the scam industry saw a rise in one-ring or wangiri calls. And so here, the caller calls, they allow the phone to ring once, and then they hang up. And the desire is that the end user is curious enough to dial the number back. But the kick here is that they're calling back a premium rate number, or maybe even an international number that looks like a US number, but it's actually international instead of national. But when you call them back, they try to keep you on the phone as long as possible. So at the end of the day, you get a bit of a surprise in your bill, and then the scammer gets a kickback on the per minute charges for that call. And so lastly, during this period, we just also want to call out neighbor spoofing. So you have your 6-digit and your 3-digit where it's the same area code, but overlay MPAs and split MPAs also give a measure of neighbor, I don't know if this is a word, but neighborishness, right? So if you're in a metropolitan area that shares multiple area codes, I could presumably call you from one of the other area codes as well, and you may think it's a call that you should be familiar with or have the expectation that you may want to pick up.
And so, the bad actors hit the gas, right, and use old and new techniques like Nysia just mentioned. But why would they stop, right? Remember, Tracey was mentioning this is a $1 billion business. But on the same token, you got users who have pain, and that really pushed the FCC to move forward to establish the Trace Act, right? It brought more pressure in the ecosystem to act, and so that including pressure to get Start Shaking done. And around that time, you had, if you asked a user, right, if about a carrier choice, 83% survey said that they would choose a carrier that would protect them from scammers and telemarketers. Now that was huge, right? Like that's 2 in just 2 years. That's 3 times than what we initially saw. So it was clear to us about where the problem was going. And so innovation continues here, and the emergence of branded calling comes about, right? But it also shined a spotlight on needing advanced analytics and spoofing mitigation tools that couple with Start Shaking to really deal with the problem that was ahead of us. So let me dig in a little bit deeper on that as it relates to branded calling. Enterprises really began to wake up to the proprietary branded calling solutions that were out in the market. So the stakes were significantly higher than not only just to protect the user, but how do we ensure that we gate bad actors to ensure they're not in between the communication with the business and the user, right? It became mission critical to get that right. So that really brought into focus a robust business vetting solution where we would have number right of use in focus. And that was going to be necessary to really meet the demands of the day. So, just guiding your eyes to the left, you see our proprietary branded solution, Inform and Engage. And very far back, you see Red Cross, right? Where the display name tells you who's calling, right? And our proprietary solution, Engage, gives you more context. It tells you who's calling and why. So in this scenario where we use Red Cross, users are more, inept to answer this call. And, we've seen answer rates in some industries as large as 90% increase from where clients previously started, right? And so as attractive as that is for businesses, is even more attractive when it comes down to bad actors seeing this as a new threat. And this will become a focal point for bad actors, no doubt.
I'd have to say, Brian, that Stir Shaken and branded call-in, couldn't come quick enough. And as we highlight the last leg in the journey that we present today, where we are currently, it's really because we need additional tools to help us basically with call transparency, right? To better understand who's on the originating end of the phone call. Because as you're migrating from, or not migrating from, because all those things are still prevalent, where you have these spoofing tactics in addition to what we call, snowshoe, or what is known as snowshoe spamming. Someone may ask, what is that? Well, similar to the context of email spam, where spammers spread traffic across many IPs and domains to go undetected, voice scammers do the same thing. They spread their traffic across thousands of random phone numbers to go undetected by scam ID solutions. The problem there, the real issue is that these calls can be masked behind enterprise numbers. They can be masked behind mobile numbers. And my personal favorite, which has been a thorn in our side, is low volume, right? They can be masked behind phone numbers that don't really have much volume in the past 30 or 60 days, which makes it even more difficult because there's not enough data to truly profile the number. And so you have this notion of spoofing, and now you have this notion of, well, I'm just going to spread my calls across the entire spectrum of numbers that are possible to make it even more difficult. And the last scam tactic that we highlight for this particular presentation is PBX hacking. You could almost have put an asterisk next to PBX hacking, because I want to point out that it's not new, right? It's not something that it's emerged since 2020 for sure, but we highlight it because we consider it as a place that scammers may actually venture towards, given that Stir Shaken is in place, right? You have this idea that calls are verified, and there's this notion of this coveted little green check, and scammers may actually go there to have their calls presented as verified. So that's kind of where we are now, where they're all over the place, right? We have to really understand the difference between the good calls and the bad calls, and the solutions have to be way more advanced to be able to discriminate between those.
So the future is now. We are beyond the Stir Shaken deadline with either alignment on compliance or either a commitment to get there, right? So bad actors are evolving, analytics are evolving as well, and now so is the call experience with rich call data via the Stir Shaken framework, right? Another exciting new world that we get an opportunity to go secure, right? And so while we all have our work cut out for us, for us, it is all about the data. We have to continue to evolve, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a bit. So now that Nysia and I have shared with you the evolution of the scam industry, and some of the industry responses. I'm going to pass the torch to my friend Julie, who's going to discuss a little bit more about the impacts to the user experience.
Hey, thank you very much, Brian. Nysia, appreciate it. So now that we have an arsenal of tools in our tool belt, thanks to the evolution of the scam industry, customers can receive differing levels of information when their phone rings, which leads to different call experiences. You can still have plain vanilla calling numbers with city state. You can have enterprise or consumer calling name. You can have those categories that Brian was talking about, charity or telemarketer, or of course, an indicator for a fraudulent call like scam likely. There are options for rich branded calling, like some of the proprietary solutions that are available in the market today, as well as STIR/SHAKEN based rich call data, which is just on the horizon. And all of these experiences can come with or without that positive SHAKEN verification result, the little green check mark or the number verified or equivalent. But if we aren't careful, users can actually have a variety of possibly conflicting call experiences. So what do we mean by conflicting experiences? While it's certainly true that subscribers can potentially get more insight into the calling party these days, do they really know how to interpret that information every time? Even with all the new technology, they may not have the confidence to answer their phone. In the example in the left, you'll see a very nice business calling name, and maybe the calling number is familiar to the end user, to the called party. But maybe they're used to that STIR/SHAKEN indication now, the little green check mark. If they are, then how do they interpret this phone call? Should they answer or not? And on the right-hand side is actually really the opposite problem. Analytics has come back with, hey, this call is a scam, but STIR/SHAKEN verification says, hey, this is a good authenticated call. So without careful consideration and planning by service providers and their partner vendors, users can become confused on what calls are safe to answer or not. So as the call experience is influenced by the scam evolution journey that we've been discussing so far, the phone call has become more complicated and has more decision points. So say a consumer or an enterprise or call center with or without branded calling originates a call. Well, the originating service provider that handles that call has to, at the very least, determine what to do with the call in terms of STIR/SHAKEN authentication. And then, of course, the terminating service provider is ultimately responsible for the final call disposition. Should it be blocked because of scam? Should it be sent to voicemail? Should it be allowed to continue to its final destination, the called party? Is there another option, possibly sending the call to an announcement or something else? And if the call is to continue on to the called party, then what is displayed? So there's numerous factors that can go into these decisions. Hopefully, the service provider has analytics. Most certainly, they have local policies they have to adhere to. Maybe there's end user preferences in play, or more global carrier level preferences. With all these going on, what or who decides which wins? And they're not mutually exclusive. It could be that more than one wins. So it's imperative that there is a robust policy engine or orchestration level that is analyzing all of these inputs and makes the correct call experience decision each and every time. So as you can see, even the technology that manages the various call experience inputs, the decision making must continue to evolve as well. So the ultimate call experience is really about restoring confidence and knowledge to every call, which we all know. But what does that mean? So it's knowing who's calling in context. It's about advanced analytics solutions, their advanced tooling, algorithms, and methodologies. It's empowering end users and service providers with advanced capabilities and control over local policies and preferences, and eliminating or at least reducing confusion and providing consistent and relevant call experience every time. It's about keeping enterprises, their brands, and their assets safe and protected. And it's very important that you can continuously incorporate customer and industry feedback into your solutions to meet current needs. That's why we at First Orion issue regular industry feedback surveys so that we know what's going on in the industry and what consumers consider important at the time. And as for data analytics and data scientists such as Nysia, continued learning, research, and honing new skills are essential. And because these elements are ever evolving and growing, the ultimate call experience is actually a journey in its own right and not a final destination. So what's next? Remember that billion-dollar industry that Tracey started with? Well, it's definitely not going away. They make way too much money. And I just love this picture because scammers are just like robbers that are trying to break into your house or your place of business. And if they can't go into the front door, they're going to try a window. They can't get in through a window, maybe they go through the back door. Maybe they've figured out some way to bypass your alarm system. So scammers, like robbers, will continuously try to figure out how to get past your defenses. So scammers will continue to evolve, and so will consumer expectations. And therefore, data analytics, tools, methodologies, and solutions must continue to evolve. And so for virtually all of us in the telecom business, and really that includes anyone with a telephone, the ultimate call experience journey continues on to its next phase. And now I am going to pass it back to Tracey for some more discussion and questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Julie. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Nysia. So before we move into any audience questions, we're going to move into more of a fireside chat format and elaborate on First Orion's perspective. So I have a question that I want to ask Nysia, Julie, and Brian. So Julie had mentioned that the journey continues. We just heard her say that. So what does First Orion think the next steps are, and how might it impact the call experience?
So from my vantage point, right, Julie highlighted the role of the data scientists continuing researching and just developing new methodologies and really offering domain expertise as well to be able to tackle some of these problems. I think one of the first steps is really understanding where we are with STIR/SHAKEN now that the deadlines are here, right? Now that the carriers have implemented the solution. We know that there are still small carriers who have yet to implement even a robocall mitigation solution or STIR/SHAKEN due to that extension of the deadline. But we don't really know what the data looks like for STIR/SHAKEN, right? We don't know which calls are being attested, which calls may be failed attestation. We need to really dive into the data to understand what's being delivered by STIR/SHAKEN, one. And then two is, then we need to understand what the effects of that are, right? If it's really as effective as we hope it will be in mitigating illegally spoofed calls, are we keeping an eye on the traffic to understand where scammers have migrated to? All right, Julie offered the the visual of the scammers kind of, if you close the front door, it's like a stir shaken. Is I've locked the front door, I put the bolt place, right? It's secure, but you have, a cracked window or something. Are you watching that window to make sure that scammers aren't coming through there as well? And so, one of the things on the slide that we highlighted with the evolution of the scam tactics is PBX hacking, and making sure that those sort of systems are secure. But then we also have potential, solutions maybe for outbound call protection. Are the scammers vying for that coveted, little green check through PBX hacking, or maybe even masking under the carriers themselves? And so just to be able to think about it from an analytical standpoint, but also watching the traffic to understand where the shifts are taking place, to be able to rebound and kind of cover that traffic in a way that's effective as well.
So in that same vein, and thank you, Nysia, I'll just pile on here. Specifically, I was talking about our proprietary branding calling solution a bit ago, and we talked about RCD now starting to come into focus. It's going to be more we really have to have a real big focus on what is considered business vetting and right of number of use, so KYC. For me, it's ensuring that we know you are who you say you are, and that you have right of use of the phone number to be able to take advantage of these solutions, right? And so I talked about 90% increase in answer rates from baseline of what businesses are seeing today. I think, and I talked about also like how attractive that is to businesses, and it being as attractive to bad actors as well. And so, the threats of tomorrow are not the threats of today. And, just like we see rotating phone numbers today, we don't know if bad actors will really attempt to appear like a real business and go pull out all the stops to do so, to ensure that they can go under the radar and cause real big damage. And let's face it, it's one thing to change the display name. When you start messing with the entity's brand, that can have lasting impacts to that particular brand. And so we have to be vigilant. And in some cases, it may be just, looking at your own backyard. You got many businesses today that, won't work with you if you're not ISO compliant, things of that nature. Ensuring that you have the right protocols in place is one of those things I think is going to be paramount. So when I'm thinking about developing new products, things that users are going to react to in the market, I'm also thinking about how those things can be utilized by bad actors who cause real damage.
I would also say, in addition to that, Brian, when you talk about branded calling and how that's about to evolve, how do we piece those things together? It's like the image that Julie presented. I think, Julie presented with the gears. How do those things work in tandem, right? The five V's, the big data. We're having more data variety. We're having more volume. There's maybe even velocity, depending on how quickly the data is coming in. But how do you combine those things from an analytical perspective so that you aren't creating to the confusion that the end user is having, and all those things work well in tandem so that the end presentation makes sense and it's the right decision?
Yeah, I think Brian and Nysia, you're spot on. The only thing that I would really add is, as we get more data and as we see those trends, we're always trying to incorporate those, yes, into our solution, and also create new solutions on top of that. So we like to look at these things holistically, and ultimately we are a big data company. And so we actually come up with solutions based on what we see in the data. So it's actually very exciting, I think, to see, what like Nysia's team sees in the data, and how that's going to impact our solutions and and the call experience, because really we create our solutions based on the data. So it'd be very interesting to see the efficacy of Stir Shaken and some of these, the new mandates and the deadlines, and see if there's any shifts there, and how we can use that to enhance our solutions.
Okay, so let me move us forward just a bit. We have a couple of more things that we wanted to talk about from a fireside chat format. I also see some questions coming in, so I just want to let you guys know we will get to those questions. I'm gonna throw one out there to the panel. Julie, you talked about all the inputs. We just mentioned it again that need to be considered that impact the call experience. What's First Orion's perspective as a solution provider, and what advice would we give a carrier?
So I'll jump in here and make a few statements, and then if anyone else wants to chime in, for sure. I think we First Orion give the power to the carrier to decide, with all of these different inputs. And so, everyone, all analytic solution providers are not necessarily doing the same exact things. But I think what's key is giving the power to the carrier to make decisions is what's paramount, right? So they can really, as it relates to the end user experience, dictate, what wins out in some of these things. Julia mentioned orchestration and taking all these different inputs to decide what the user experience should be. Now, First Orion, for sure, we're all about the data. We're a data company with a data and technology company with a flair for innovation, right? So I have full trust in our protection solutions and complement those things with Stir Shaken. So in the event of the screen that we showed earlier, where you have scam likely and you have also number verified, I wouldn't, my advice for someone working with us is to show scam likely. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, and the way we have created our solutions is really to give the power to the service provider, to the carrier, to make the decision. But we, of course, partner with them. But what I mean is that our solutions, everything is configurable and from a so that the service provider ultimately has the power to make that decision, and maybe they change their mind. Maybe they start off baby steps and don't want to give analytics as much power into what happens to the call until they're comfortable with it. So and so something else takes priority. Maybe it is Stir Shaken or something else, and then they can change over time the call experience for their customers. So we're all about uh, designing and implementing solutions so that the service provider and their end customers, have options, and it's available to them however they want to implement it. But we definitely try to partner with them to explain, why one decision would be better than another. But that's the way we proceed.
Thank you, Julie. So last one that I'm going to throw out before we go to the audience questions. As we talked about inputs to the call decision, we know there's another input for consideration that's looming, and it's coming in September. And it could impact the calling experience. We expect it will impact the calling experience. What are First Orion's thoughts on the robocall mitigation database September deadline for terminating service providers to begin blocking calls to North American numbering plan numbers from carriers that are not registered in the database?
Well, I think I'll take this one and just give my thoughts. I think that we are watching the industry response to this as things evolve. I think many people here watching this webinar are doing the same thing, and not only domestically, but for sure internationally as well. So in terms of our solution, it's pretty clear, and we've already given this thought of how we can use that data. We certainly know how to block a call based on various factors. So we know how we could use this data, and we know how it could integrate into our current solutions, scam and spoof detection and protection solutions. Now, actually making that a reality, getting the data out of the database, et cetera, and who's actually still looking at, who's actually registered so far, et cetera. We're still keeping an eye on all that. So I would say it's definitely will be a new input, and it would certainly have, yes, call experience impacts. So right now, I think we're kind of in watcher mode as well as for sure doing planning. And that's my thought. I think we're pretty much in the same boat as probably the other analytics providers out there.
All right. Well, thank you all. So we're going to move now to some audience questions. I've seen them pop up in the window. I'm going to go through those. I think we have a few out there, and I'll just toss these out at random, and we can all kind of talk about the answer to them. So the first one was around RCD and how originating service providers can update their customers' caller RCD information used by remote end analytics database, as there are many out there. Here's the question: is there a standard until STIR/SHAKEN RCD becomes widely available? So if I interpret the question that was put into the window here, I'm looking at it as the proprietary solutions that we talked about, Brian. We talked about the engage capabilities, and until RCD becomes implemented via STIR/SHAKEN and it's ubiquitous and that's kind of standards driven, is there anything that's leading some of these proprietary solutions to be more standard?
Yeah, so what I would say is that so this is more geared towards RCD. Our proprietary solution is, for lack of a better term, out of band, right? To provide that, right? But just what I would say here more specifically to RCD as mentioned here is that some of you may have seen the latest release with first Orion being in the news, right, with RCD, and which was made a really big splash. But what really matters is a few key things, I believe, and so it's choosing a user, or excuse me, a service provider, not only that puts business vetting and right of use of a number first, but also works with those entities for when it comes to STIR/SHAKEN, right? A STIR/SHAKEN provider. And everyone doesn't do all of the same exact things. However, the future it's coming when it comes to RCD, and while that's firming up as it relates to being respected from end to end, and full RCD via STIR/SHAKEN is, will all depend on saturation of market handsets and respecting it all the way through. First Orion has blazed a trail forward when it comes to our proprietary solution, like Inform and Engage. We for sure provide rock solid business vetting solutions and allow like incredible reach to a lot of the market today. And so it's all about the right technology partner that can do business vetting, and you want to nestle yourself with someone, I believe, that has a lot of capability to help shape the future and prescribe for you, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does. Thanks, Brian. I'm going to move on to a couple of more questions just as I look at the time on the clock. So Let's talk about the next one, and it's around neighbor spoofing. And I'm going to read the question. Again, it's two parts. Neighbor spoofing being tied to the numbering plan in Canada, US, and it's even mentioned that perhaps other Caribbean territories too, but maybe not in the format of NPA, NXX, XXXX, as NPA is effectively unique. So in following the webinar earlier today from the Netherlands, are scams targeted specifically with neighbor spoofing more likely to be Americans, or at least people that know about the North American numbering plan, than foreign actors outright? That's kind of the first part. And then the second part is, are there metrics in scams on a more worldwide basis, since neighbor spoofing may be less applicable in other countries based on the numbering plan, or is this ultimately going to be analytics on a per country basis, especially as Stir Shaken gets traction outside the US?
I almost want to say absolutely, but there were a few questions in there that didn't really apply to. So let me kind of break it down. I would definitely say that when a number is spoofed, it's someone who understands how the North American number plan works and how our area codes are assigned. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's more than likely Americans, because I'm not sure that that's the case, but it's definitely people who understand the way our numbering system works. When we talk about the neighbor spoofing tactic in other countries, I do think it's on a per country basis, right? We actually understand, as we're trying to expand our reach into international waters and in the UK, we understand that that's not an approach that we would take there. So we treat each country specific. We get it, we understand the market, we kind of do an assessment, kind of like we were talking about earlier, right? What's the efficacy of Stir Shaken? Well, where are you? What's the base level? Where are you now according to the country? But there are other elements of spoof, right? When we saw, or when we looked at some of the UK data, right? Even the way that they allocate their mobile number block, that's pretty easy to spoof. If you have a number that starts with, 44 and a 7, the end user might think that it's another mobile number calling you and be more inclined to pick up. So there are other elements of spoof there that don't necessarily apply to neighbor spoofing. But again, we would only go in, we have to go in and assess where the country is as a whole and what type of scams that they have going on to really stand up a system or a solution that's effective, and not just kind of a one size fits all scam ID solution.
All right. Thank you, Nysia. So I'll move on to the next question. And it is, again, around spoofing, but a little different. What do you see as risks for telephone number spoofing involving numbers that have been allocated to communication service providers that do not assign them for end users, but rather lease them to third parties who use them unlawfully? These numbers could receive Stir Shaken treatment with attestation level A, yet exhibit misbehavior as an unwanted robocall. How much of a concern is this?
So I personally say, and I'll let you pile in here, Julie, that those leasing those numbers and providing a level attestation have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure the use of that phone number and bad actors. So at the end of the day, business vetting, again, I believe is going to be core and center to ensuring that the user that you're, or in this case, who you're allocating that phone number to, is abiding by all the rules and that they are who they say they are.
Yep.
The only thing I would add here, I thought this was a very interesting question, and it is definitely a concern. So we do actually have solutions. We work with one of our customers who being able to identify, so this is a little off topic, but I just wanted to bring it in, to be able to identify numbers that are not allocated yet at all, and yet they're being used for unlawful reasons. So that's an important aspect of it. One, and then two, when they are being leased or to be used by third parties. They do have the right to use the number, but are using them unlawfully, and could get a attestation level treatment. That absolutely is where analytics comes in, and you need to take into consideration, hey, do you listen to your analytics, or do you listen to stir shaken? So the question is, how much of a concern is this? It should be a concern, and why you really need like a multi-pronged approach to figure out what's going on with a call.
I think that's also where the call category and the end user input also comes into play, right? Even if it's just a nuisance call or something like that, maybe it's not as egregious as a scam call, but the consumer would rather not. It could very well be an attested call, but the end user would rather not receive it. And so when you consider all those things together, you're able to mitigate the consumer friction, right? You're not passing along, or the user still feels like they have some control about the calls that land on their device.
Okay. I don't see any more questions in the window pane. So with that, I think I will close it out and appreciate everybody's time for joining us here today. And I will kick it back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Tracey. I want to thank you, Julie, Nysia, and Brian for an excellent presentation, a great panel discussion. And I also want to thank First Orion for supporting our event as a diamond sponsor. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Before I close, there's two items I want to just briefly go over. Please join us tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time for a virtual fireside chat, Stir Shaken and the World, Perspectives from the US and the UK. And the last item is everyone has an incredibly important decision to make right now. Do you want to have a stirred or a shaken martini? And with that, I will wish everybody a good evening, a good night, and see you again tomorrow. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone.